All right, welcome everybody. I've just handed out your last homework assignment, the last one of the semester. So I'm sure that'll come as a relief to not have any more of those. This one is due on Monday of next week. And I think after today's class, you could probably complete the entire assignment in an hour or less. If you really focused, stayed on topic, set your phone someplace you couldn't see it, I think you could probably do this assignment pretty quickly. So get that over with, and then you just won't even have to think about it anymore. It'll be the last assignment of the semester. Also, as another reminder, I mentioned this previously, but we're going to have the bonus quiz on the last day of class. Even if you've got a perfect quiz average, I'd appreciate it if you took the bonus quiz, just because it's interesting data to compare the beginning of the semester score to the end of the semester score and try and identify what are the topics that students kind of already had a handle on as they came into the course, and maybe what are the topics that even after the course people are still struggling with. So we'll do that on Friday of next week. Any questions related to the announcements? Did I get all of the homework assignments? All right. Well, we're going to continue talking about depreciation today. And it's been an exciting morning for me because I was on the IRS website reading about depreciation, always trying to spice up the lectures a little bit. So I'm going to be sprinkling it with some IRS information today. So let's talk about the Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System, MACRS. Now, basically what this is a hybrid between the two approaches that we looked at in class last time. Does anybody remember the name of the two methods that we did on Monday? Straight line and what's the other one? Declining balance. Right. So remember that in straight line it was very simple to calculate the depreciation because it started at the purchase price and it ended at either zero or some salvage value. Whereas declining balance was a little bit more tricky because it's not a constant amount of depreciation each year. Now, what this approach does is it is a hybrid of the two. The declining balance method, purely speaking, will never depreciate something to zero. But this approach does depreciate the value of items to zero, which is good news for businesses because remember what they want is they want to take as much depreciation early as possible because the present value of money is higher than money in the future. And so one of the things they don't like about straight line, one thing that a company doesn't like about straight line is that too much of the depreciation is in the future. But what they do like about straight line is at least the value will depreciate to zero, which means that they get all of the value written off over the life of the item. By contrast, the declining balance method, because it tapers to a salvage value at best, you never get all of the depreciation. And so they do a switchover in this hybrid method that we're talking about today. So it depreciates to zero, and it switches from the double declining balance, which means 200 is the percentage that's used. Remember last time, one of our methods for the declining balance was you start off with a set percentage, and then you have to calculate the lowercase d factor that specifies the depreciation based on the percentage. So this switches from 200% to straight line, and they do the straight line at the end just to make sure that the book value goes to zero at the end of the class life. So this system is the result of lobbying. You know, the effect of companies donate to Congress. Congress is responsive to their constituents, and the constituents said, we want to have an approach that depreciates quickly and depreciates all the way to zero. And this is the Frankenstein monster that resulted. One of the things that you have to do in this approach is you don't actually do the calculations of depreciation yourself, but rather those calculations are already completed, and you look up the amount of depreciation off of a table. But what you have to know is which table to use, because different items depreciate over different periods of time. And so there are these standardized recovery periods that are based on the asset class. And so if we talk about a car, in this class sometimes we've said a Honda is going to last 12 years and the Yugo is going to last for 5 years. And so, we'd have maybe a realistic expectation of how long the equipment may last. But according to this system, all vehicles depreciate over the same lifespan, regardless of how well made they are, who the manufacturer is. It's kind of like a standardized system for how long items last. One other thing that I've just mentioned very briefly in our last class period, but we need to discuss in more detail today, is the half-year convention. And in exams, this is the issue that I think trips up the most students, is the half-year convention. Not just explaining it, but it actually turns into a problem calculating if you don't do things right. The half-year convention means that the IRS, as generous as they are, they want to avoid the situation of people buying an item at the end of the year and then trying to take the depreciation over the entire, like trying to look like you've owned the item the whole year, so getting a lot of depreciation when really you just bought it on December 31st. And so to try and prevent people from gaming the system, what they said is, regardless of when you buy the item in the year, the first year of depreciation that you're going to take is only a half share of depreciation. So actually you get the most depreciation on an item's second year rather than on the first year, because their assumption is that on average people are going to be buying things in the middle of the year, and so they should get half the depreciation for a half year's ownership rather than a full year's depreciation. So the first thing I mentioned is that things depreciate according to class. This is a little bit small, but the same figure is in your book. You can see that different types of items are expected to last over different periods. Now there's 3 columns here, and for the most part, people are allowed to pick which of the 3 systems they depreciate according to. You can pick class life, GDS, or ADS, and depreciate according to whichever one is most beneficial to you. It might be that you want to lengthen the depreciation schedule, like maybe you already have plenty of tax breaks now, and so you want to take the depreciation in the future, in which case you'd want to have a longer depreciation period rather than a shorter one. That's probably a rare situation, but it can pop up. So if we compare, for example, office furniture. Office furniture is expected to last 10 years according to class life and ADS, which ADS stands for Alternative Depreciation System. But the general depreciation system, which in this case most people would choose if they could, says that you can take that depreciation over 7 years. So it's kind of interesting when you look through some of these different types of items, the government's estimation of how long this equipment's going to last. For instance, a tractor, tractor units for use over the road. I think that means, like a semi-truck. They're saying that those will last 3 years according to GDS or 4 according to the other 2 systems. So I guess they're expecting that people are going to put a lot of miles on those vehicles and that a lot of the depreciation occurs early on because they're almost in continuous use. On the other hand, there are things that are really durable and last for a long time, like the equipment used for the manufacture of cement. It's durable equipment that's really long-lasting, and so they say that that'll be 20 years according to class life and ADS, 15 for GDS. And at the furthest extreme of long-lasting equipment is electricity equipment, like gas utility distribution facilities, electrical utilities, so things that are long-term infrastructure items depreciate over the really long term. And there's another table similar to this that the government has that relates to items that aren't in these classification categories, like buildings, whether they're residential buildings or whether they are commercial buildings and so on. So in a problem, a word problem, you'll be told what the equipment is and which recovery system you're supposed to use. And so the in-class exercise I have for you today says your company has bought a bus and it's going to depreciate according to GDS. And so the first step in the problem is to find out how many years the item depreciates over. And you do that by looking in the asset class and then following the recovery period for whatever depreciation system. So let's talk a little bit more about ADS, because ADS, you may be wondering, what are the circumstances that would make someone have to depreciate over 14 years instead of 7? It's pretty uncommon that someone would choose that as an elective, but sometimes they're forced to. And here's what it says on the IRS website about the ADS, the Alternative Depreciation System. It's kind of like a penalty system. You can't depreciate as quickly if certain conditions apply. Like if the item is only used partially for business. So let's say that you've purchased a vehicle that you most of the time use for your personal travel, and occasionally you use it in your business activities. So if the property is used 50% or less for business, then you'd have to depreciate that vehicle according to ADS rather than according to GDS. Things that are used outside the United States depreciate more slowly. Property that's tax exempt. One thing that I thought was a little bit interesting is this last bullet point here. Property imported from a foreign country for which an executive order is in effect because the country maintains trade restrictions or engages in other discriminatory acts. So, for example, if there was a judgment that China was illegally dumping steel on the U.S. market, and that the U.S. had imposed the decision that they are maintaining trade restrictions because of that. Well, in that case, then property imported from that country that has the restrictions in place, all the people who buy those things now have to depreciate their equipment more slowly. So it has kind of a trickle-down effect on the people who purchase the items. So you kind of have to be careful when you're buying expensive, high-ticket items in a business to make sure that you meet the conditions you'd like for the depreciation system you have to have. A lot of times, the profitability of a project depends on tax treatment. If you don't have good lawyers who are going to structure your income and the deductions you take carefully, that may mean the difference between a company that goes out of business and one that is profitable. So any questions about ADS? There's lots more on the IRS website. So I encourage you to, maybe between semesters, bone up on tax law. All right, so here is the table, and it illustrates the half-year convention that I was mentioning before. So let's say that we looked up from the previous table the type of equipment we have, and it told us we should depreciate over a 15-year period. So we'd go to the 15-year column, and I'm not going to make you do this because it would be tedious, but if we added up all of these values, they'd add up to 1, which means the full value of the item is going to be depreciated over the 15 years. But it's a little bit strange. It says 15 years, but how many rows are there actually? There's 16 rows. So look at this. It says 15 years, but here it actually is over 16. Now again, the reason for that is that the first year you only get a half share of depreciation, and then that remaining amount is spread out over the rest of the years. And so here's the second half year of depreciation. And since it's at the end, it's not going to be the same amount as the depreciation that you had at the beginning. But the idea is that the depreciation declines over time because the value is decreasing over time, but it has been forced to depreciate to 0 because of all of these factors adding up to 1. So let's say that you have an item that cost $100,000. The way to know what the depreciation is each year is you simply multiply the initial first cost of the item by these factors, and then that tells you the depreciation amount for that year. And so then the book value at any given year is going to be the book value of the year before it minus this year's depreciation. So that's the same approach that we had last time when we were calculating depreciation. So here's the formula for that. The depreciation in year T, where T is just time, whatever year we're in, the depreciation for this year is the factor, so the lowercase d, rather than having to calculate that like we did in class on Monday, that lowercase d is what we get off of the table. So here are the d values that you'll use in calculating the depreciation. These are the lowercase depreciation factors that you substitute into this formula, and b is the first cost. So the depreciation amount is going to be decreasing over time because the d value is changing over time. It's getting lower and lower. And that's a little bit different than it was in the past, where the factor was constant. So here the factor will be changing. And then the book value at any time is the beginning first cost of the item minus the cumulative depreciation. And the easy way to do that on a spreadsheet is just to have the last year's book value minus this year's depreciation, and then that will give you the book value for the year that you're in. Any questions? All right. Well, let's get into this in-class exercise that I have for you today. I'll hand that out. You can use Excel if you'd like for this, but of course it's not required. Here's the formula if you want to refer to it. What I'm asking to calculate is tell me what's the depreciation in year 1, the depreciation amount in year 2, year 3, and so on. And then also calculate the book value for each of the years. So each of the years is going to be T, and then D, this lowercase d, is what you get from the factor table, table 7.3 on the handout. Let me point one thing out that's important. As you calculate the depreciation each year, B stays the same. So you're using the same book value, original book value of $238,000 to calculate each year's depreciation. So lowercase d changes, but B is always the same first cost in calculating depreciation for each individual year. So don't make the classic mistake of thinking that a 5-year depreciation occurs over 5 years. You know, it would be too simple if it was that way. A 5-year depreciation actually occurs over 6 years, 6 calendar years, but there's 5 years of depreciation because you're getting a half share in year 1 and a half share in year 6. So here on screen it's showing the depreciation factors, the depreciation amounts, and the book values for each of the years. So according to those IRS regulations for ADS, if this bus was made in North Korea or something like that, then it would have depreciated over, let's see, 9 years instead of 5. So don't buy a North Korean bus for more than one reason. So the half-year convention. I'm interested to know, is anybody willing to speak up and say what they wrote for Explain the Half-Year Convention? Any brave volunteers? Yes, please. Okay. Your first depreciation is cut in half. That's half of it. And then the other half is that half of depreciation, that half year of depreciation is just like pushed down. So you get a half share at the beginning and at the end. All right. Well, we are going to finish up a little bit early today. Let's take one last look at these announcements here. On the horizon is the homework due on Monday, and then the bonus quiz on Friday. All right? Have a great day. I'll see you on Friday.